They said he was just an old man with too many stories and no one left to tell them to. That's what the young orderly muttered outside room 11B, thinking no one could hear. 82 years old, with a limp in one leg and silence in his eyes, Arthur Delgado had lived through more battles than most men could name, but to the new staff at Mercy General, he was just the vet in the corner who talks to ghosts. On the last Thursday of May, the curtain was drawn closed for the final time, and when the nurses found him still, shut and peaceful, they almost missed the dusty wooden box tucked above the window ledge, locked for decades. When it was opened, curiosity sparked by a visiting clerk, it revealed more than medals. It held a folded flag, worn soft by time, a silver star clipped beside an oak leaf cluster, and a handwritten letter with the presidential seal. To Sergeant First Class Arthur Delgado, for valor beyond duty. But that wasn't even the part that stunned them. Taped beneath the lid was a photograph, Arthur standing tall in jungle fatigues, flanked by 4 grim soldiers, each now a legend in their own right. That image would be the first of many to go viral, but not because of what it showed, because of what happened 60 minutes after Arthur's blood stained the sidewalk outside that little corner store. If you agree that our veterans should never be forgotten, especially the quiet ones who gave everything, like and subscribe, because this story isn't just about revenge, it's about legacy. You wouldn't have noticed him at first. Arthur walked with a slow, deliberate pace, always wearing the same dark green windbreaker, faded from sun and years of Texas heat, with the cuffs fraying at the edges and a bent cane swinging from his wrist like it was an extension of muscle memory. Every morning, like clockwork, he left his tiny apartment on Elmhurst Street at 6 a.m. sharp and shuffled 3 blocks to the bodega, nodded to Mr. Kim behind the counter, bought his usual coffee and sweet roll, and sat on the cracked bench just outside, where he'd sip in silence, his eyes drifting across the neighborhood like a sentry stuck in time. Most folks paid him no mind, just the old man on the corner. But on the morning it happened, something fell off. Arthur saw it before anyone else did. The nervous kid lingering near the payphone, the sudden quiet from the side alley, the spray paint still fresh on the brick wall behind the dumpster. A red side symbol, El Camino 77s, the gang that had started taking over after dark. Arthur noticed the way the air shifted, too quiet, too still, just like in country when a trap was set and the jungle forgot to breathe. He stepped inside the bodega just as Lino Morales, 19, high off bravado and a blood stripe down his jaw, slammed the front door open with 2 of his boys behind him. Mr. Kim flinched behind the register, muttering that he already paid this month. Not enough, Lino barked, slapping the counter. Inflation, old man. Arthur didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He just stepped between them, came planted, body straightened as if gravity itself respected the way he stood. He's got nothing more to give, he said quietly. You need to leave. Lino stared, then laughed, tossing his cigarette to the floor. Who the hell are you, Grandpa? Arthur didn't answer. Just stared, unblinking, like he had when facing down armed men half a world away. Lino swung. The punch wasn't clean, but it was fast, caught Arthur across the jaw, and sent him stumbling into the aisle. Mr. Kim yelled. Someone outside screamed. Arthur hit the floor hard. His jacket shifted as he fell, and the corner of that old Medal of Honor poked out from under his shirt, still pinned to the lining after all these years. Lino stepped over him, noticed it, laughed. What's this, huh? Halloween. He yanked it free, tossed it on the ground, and spit on it. Fake-ass war hero. They left laughing. The store security camera caught every frame. By the time the ambulance arrived, Arthur was unconscious. But not before you whispered something to the young man who ran to his side. Carlos, just 20, had helped carry Arthur's groceries more than once. Arthur gave him a crumpled card and said, "Call that number. Only if it's real bad." Carlos called. He didn't expect anyone to answer. He didn't expect the woman on the other end to say, "Is it Arthur? Confirm location. We're en route." 58 minutes later, 3 matte black SUVs pulled into Elmhurst, moving like machines trained not to make noise. They parked in the alley behind the bodega. 6 individuals stepped out. No names, no uniforms, but one glance told you. These weren't security guards. They moved like thunder waiting to strike. One wore mirrored aviators even as the sun dipped low. Another wore gloves even in the Texas heat. The last to exit the 3rd SUV was a woman, tall, steel gray hair tied back, her expression carved from stone. She walked to the blood-stained sidewalk, looked down at Arthur's cane still lying where he fell, and whispered, "You should have called sooner, old man." She turned to the others. Find them. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just quiet, precise movement. A new kind of war had begun, not with rifles, but with reputation. Because what Lino didn't know was that Arthur Delgado wasn't just an old man with stories. He was the man who had pulled 3 SEALs out of a kill zone in 1968, the man who trained 2 special ops instructors, and the only non-commissioned officer still living who had once ordered a future general to shut up and move. And the people who owed him? They didn't forget. They were just waiting for a reason to remind the world who Arthur really was. They didn't kick indoors. They didn't shout. They didn't have to. When the 6 figures stepped out of those matte black SUVs, the city didn't even notice at first, not the neighbors, not the local cops, not even the gang boys who had just assaulted an old man they thought had no one. But the moment those boots hit the pavement, Elmhurst changed. The tall woman in the lead, Colonel Dana Hart, didn't wear insignia, but she didn't need to, her presence was rank enough. Steel gray hair pulled into a tight braid, mirrored aviators, and the same posture she'd held since command. Dana wasn't there for sentiment. She was there for Arthur. And for reckoning. She walked into the ER at Mercy General like she had clearance to heaven itself, past 3 nurses and a security guard who didn't dare stop her, and stepped into room 11B. Arthur was unconscious, tubes in his arm, bruises fresh and blooming like ugly metals across his face. Dana stood still for a full minute before she said a word. Then she reached out, placed her hand over his, and said quietly, "You old stubborn bastard. You lived." The rest of the team gathered in silence. Sergeant Lynn, who'd once owed Arthur her life in Kandahar, Ramirez, who still wore the black ring from his second deployment Arthur had helped him survive, pale, intel, quiet, and watching everything, and Simmons, who hadn't spoken since they landed. Each of them carried something invisible, but one thing they shared. Delgado had shaped them. And now they were back, because someone had broken the one rule you never break. You don't lay hands on the man who taught half of Special Forces what honor looks like. The team fanned out across the city without ever drawing a weapon. They went to the local precinct, where Hale handed a sealed envelope to the desk sergeant, an envelope stamped with a DOD crest and a quiet note. "This falls under federal oversight." A minute later, the footage from the bodega's camera was being reviewed by a JAG officer in a nondescript suit, while the local PD scrambled to understand what they'd missed. At City Hall, a man in polished shoes walked into the mayor's office carrying a copy of Arthur's service record, the original Silver Star citation, and a list of names, generals, colonels, and cabinet officials who had all sent letters. The mayor read the first 3 names and turned pale. "Find the man who did this," he ordered. "Now." Meanwhile, on the street, Ramirez and Simmons tracked Lino's crew, not to threaten, not to harm, but to observe. One by one, the gang members started noticing things. Their tags had been cleaned off the brick walls before sunrise. Their favorite hangout under the overpass? Cleared. Someone power washed the symbol they'd just painted less than 24 hours ago. It wasn't graffiti removal. It was a rager. And when Lino texted his guys to regroup that night, only one showed up, and even he kept glancing over his shoulder. Word was spreading through Elmhurst fast. The old man's got shadows. And those shadows didn't play. Dana returned to the hospital that night and sat beside Arthur in the dark. A nurse tried to ask her to leave until she saw the ID Dana flashed. She backed out without a word. "They called you weak," Dana whispered. "Called you forgotten. But you saved more lives than they'll ever understand." She held up her phone, scrolling through a secure group chat full of old names, old units, old ghosts. One message had gone out earlier that day. The replies were coming in fast. "Say when. Just say when. I owe that man my career. Tell Arthur he still owes me a cigar." Dana smiled faintly. "You're not alone, old friend. Not today. Not ever." At the same time, across town, Carlos, the young man who made the call, walked back to the bodega and found Ramirez waiting there. No words, just a nod of respect, and something pressed into his hand. A patch, black and gold, with the words Vigil Silentium stitched across the top. "You earned it," Ramirez said. Carlos didn't understand what it meant, not fully. But something about it felt heavy. Sacred. Back at Mercy General, Arthur stirred for the first time. His fingers twitched, and his eyes blinked open slowly. "Still ugly," he rasped hoarsely. Dana laughed once, sharp and full of relief. "And still dramatic." Arthur looked around, blinking at the familiar shadows. "You brought the wolves," he murmured. Dana nodded. "You were worth the hunt." By sunrise, the entire city block around Elmhurst was different. The bench outside the bodega had been scrubbed clean. A fresh coat of paint covered the front wall. Someone had left a new cane leaning against the door. And taped to the glass, A note written in careful black ink. He's not alone. And neither are you. Respect is no longer optional. As the sun rose, Simmons stood watch across the street, arms folded, eyes scanning every movement. No one tagged a wall that morning. No one raised their voice. Even the city felt quieter. And at the center of it all, behind hospital glass and years of history, Arthur Delgado, once thought to be just a quiet old man, watched it unfold, knowing exactly what was coming next. Because he hadn't survived for medals. He'd survived for mornings like this. Mornings when the ones you trained come back to finish the fight you never started. When justice comes with boots instead of badges, you don't see it crash in. You feel it settle like pressure in the air. The day after Arthur Delgado opened his eyes, the city held its breath. Word had already spread about the old man, the gang, the medal, the letter from a president tucked in a box no one had touched since '72. But that morning, the quiet was different. Intentional. Controlled. At 6:03 a.m., while dew still clung to the sidewalk outside the bodega, a single black vehicle rolled up to the precinct steps. Lino Morales, the 19-year-old who thought he owned the streets, stepped out in cuffs, flanked by two officers who weren't from this city and weren't in any mood to talk. Lino's face, once smug, was locked in stunned silence. His own crew had ghosted him. The kid who used to joke about fake war heroes was now facing federal assault charges, expedited, reclassified, and reviewed under military jurisdiction due to extenuating legacy protections. No one explained what that meant. They didn't have to. Across town, Colonel Dana Hart stood beside Arthur's hospital bed, watching as the news crawled across the bottom of the screen. Teen suspect in custody following assault on decorated war hero. DC officials involved. Arthur just shook his head. Wasn't meant to go this far, he whispered. Wasn't meant to go at all, Dana answered. But here we are. And she was right. Because justice wasn't the point. Legacy was. And Arthur's was roaring back to life. That same afternoon, without public announcement or fanfare, 3 retired generals and a state senator arrived on Elmhurst Street. They didn't come with parades. They came with blueprints, a city permit, and a plaque wrapped in cloth. Standing beside the bodega, Mr. Kim wept quietly as they unveiled it. Arthur Delgado Plaza. Dedicated to the quiet courage of those who never asked to be seen. Beneath it, in smaller type, honor is not declared. It is remembered. The bench Arthur had sat on every morning was sanded down, sealed, and reinstalled with a bronze placard. The cracked sidewalk? Replaced. The gang's graffiti? Already erased. Not just cleaned, but painted over with a mural by a local veteran named Sofia Reyes. A sweeping tribute showing Arthur in profile, cane in hand, surrounded by the same 4 men from the old photo in the shadow box. One of them, it turned out, had been Sofia's father. He never talked about it, she told the news crew through tears. But he told me once, if anything ever happened to Arthur, you paint him into the street so no one forgets. Meanwhile, Lino Morales sat in a federal holding facility, trying to piece together how the man he called Grandpa had brought the entire weight of the armed forces down on him. They didn't torture him. They didn't even speak to him after booking. But every hour, the guards rotated in silence, all wearing a black and gold patch on their sleeve. Vigil Silentium, the same one Ramirez gave to Carlos, and the same one that would now be worn by a new generation, trained not in war, but in watchfulness. Back in Elmhurst, something else began to shift. Local kids who used to spray paint gang signs now took part in street cleanups. One even started shadowing Mr. Kim at the register, saying he wanted to learn the ropes. And every morning, at exactly 6 a.m., someone new would sit on the bench outside the bodega, not to replace Arthur, but to carry the silence he left behind. On Sunday, 7 days after the attack, Arthur returned, not to a hospital bed, but to that same bench. He walked slow, his cane tapping with every step, escorted by Dana and a few others who chose not to be named. Reporters tried to swarm him. He said nothing, just sat, sipped coffee, watched the mural dry under the Texas sun. At one point, a boy no older than 12 stepped out from the crowd, eyes wide. My brother. He was with the guys who... Arthur nodded gently, cutting the words off. He still can choose something different. Then he reached into his coat and handed the boy something folded, a photo of the original team. Start with this. The boy clutched it like a flag. Later that afternoon, Dana gathered the small group at the corner of the plaza. He trained us to see what others miss, she said, voice tight. To listen before we speak. To lead without titles. And when someone broke the silence he kept all these years, we came, not for vengeance, but to remind the world who he was before they forgot. Arthur spoke only once that day. I don't want monuments, he said, eyes misted but firm. I want memory. Keep the memory. The fight's never really over. And then, without ceremony, he walked the length of the plaza, cane in one hand, dignity in the other, past rows of saluting veterans and tearful strangers. No speeches, no thunder, just a man, his legacy, and a silence so heavy it felt like truth. That night, as the sun dipped low and the city returned to its rhythm, a final envelope was left behind at the bodega door. Inside, a note in Arthur's handwriting. For whoever watches next, keep your eyes open and your heart steady. The story didn't end with a punch. It ended with a community standing taller, with a boy holding a photo, with a bench, a mural, and a patch. And somewhere beyond city lights, where elite soldiers train in places no one speaks of, Delgado's name was whispered into mission briefings, not as a caution, but as a creed.